All right, notebooks out, pens out, 40 minutes of focus. All right, there's no more physical activities.
Do you have a pen I can borrow?
Yes, just return it, please. Cool? So let's open up to, what's up, Mary? You joining today?
No.
Darn it. Open up to a blank page. Okay, and write the date down, July 22nd. Thanks, Mom. Okay. July 22nd. First, before we get started, did everyone do their meditations? Everyone did them? What were we at? We were at 9, and you guys were at 6? Okay, what are we seeing? There should be changes. It's been 6 weeks now. What are we seeing? What's changing? What is different about how we see?
More conscious of my behavior.
Okay, so you're more conscious of your behavior. Is that bringing on more guilt?
Yeah.
Okay, that's something kids have said a lot. Again, what is guilt stemming from? Is that stemming from judgment?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Very natural response. Is guilt helpful at times? Right, helps guide us in the right direction so we don't make poor choices. But notice it and then let it go. Don't dwell on the guilt because you can get lost in that trap if you become more mindful. But that's good, right? If we're more conscious of our choices, is that going to benefit us in especially areas when you're trying to improve in stuff like a sport? Yeah, because you'll realize that all the things you do, whether it's what you eat or how you pay attention to things, how you do your chore, that all affects your presence when you play the game, correct? What else? What about you Turner boys? That's 2 weeks of it. What has been different? Whether it's in the meditation itself or outside of it.
It's becoming easier to like actually clear my mind.
Okay, that's really good. And does that feel like it's helping you? Okay, beautiful. What else?
I just feel more relaxed.
More relaxed? Okay, calm. That's good. Again, you're going to make better decisions in that state. But continue to watch. Normally, boys, it takes at least a month before you see dramatic changes. But if we keep going up and you do it 5 days a week and your amount goes up, you should continue to feel different and see things differently. Do you think they're helping? Yes? You're just shaking your head because you want me to know that. You feel like it helps? Okay. So like you feel like there's benefit for you to do it when I'm not here in the summer, say you don't take my classes? Yeah? Okay. Cool. All right. Power. Write that down. That's the subject of today's speech. So it's class 7, power. All right. What's power? What does it mean? Being strong, having strength. Yes. What does that mean?
How much control you have.
Yeah, right? You're very powerful if you have a lot of control, right? Control has to do with choice, correct? So if I have a lot of choice and I have a lot of control, I have a lot of power. Okay, does that make sense? Obviously, when we talk about training the mind, meditations, and mindfulness, what are we trying to give you more of? Power, control. Yep, all of those are good concepts. Okay, but does that mean we're trying to give you more control of things you can't control? No. Okay, and we're going to get into that. But the first thing to understand, boys, most people, if they don't meditate, okay, who has all the power? Your mind, right? You're a slave to how it reacts, your urges, your cravings, your desires, correct? Meditation allows you to pause, to see that, and then respond, correct? That's what the watcher allows. What's that third person in the dimensions of the mind? You have the dictator, the watcher, and the wise. The wise appears because you watch in the first place. Because you're mindful in the first place, you now have a little more choice than you normally would, correct? So all I'm here to give you is more power. So you can make more choices and you don't succumb to whatever the mind wants you to do in the moment. Does that make sense? Because if you don't have power, are you a slave to the mind? Most people are. Does that make sense? Cool. So the problem is control. okay, and not necessarily just control, okay, but what do we try and do with it? When most people think of control, do they try and focus on gaining more control of the things they can't? Like results or other people, their perceptions, right? Most people are trying to gain control in the wrong ways, right? They're trying to get control of things they can't control. Are the rules already written, right? For kind of how, try not to use these big words, but the universe works, right? The rules are written, right? And you've been dealt a hand of cards, correct? All of us have been dealt different cards, okay? And that's not good or bad, okay? Most people, though, do they fight against those cards and the way things work? Most people fight it. They wish it were different, and they continue to do that. They complain, they wish, and they want, right? We just need to give that up because it's not doing us any good, and you'll just follow that trap the rest of your life. Does that make sense? So the problem is our poor use of power, because we do have power. We have a lot of power, actually, individually. But we use our power to try and gain control of things we can't, which is useless. It doesn't do us any good. Does that make sense? Okay, so the problem with power, write it down. Okay, what's the problem with power? I just explained it. Beautiful. You try to gain control of things that you can't. It gets you nowhere. And I said something like the rules are written, right? The way the world works is written, and we've been dealt different cards, okay? Most people have non-acceptance towards those rules. They just wish it were different. Or they try and they use their powerful use of imagination in the wrong ways to try and gain control of things they can't. Does that make sense? And there's 0 point in fighting the rules, right? It does you no good. It's preventing you from more energy that could be used in the power that you do have. Are we cool? On the same page? Beautiful. Okay? So, like I said, we have two choices. What are our choices? What do we think? Just based on what I said in the last slide.
Trying to control the things you can't control or accepting it.
Or accepting the things you can't control and then focusing on what? The things you can control. Does that make sense? So we talked about energy. Energy is finite in the last class, which means what? If I spend energy somewhere, that means what? Taking energy from somewhere else, right? So when I try and conspire this elaborate plan to gain control of the things I can't, right? That's wasted energy on things you can do right now that you can control. Does that make sense? Okay. This is called the paradox of control, all right? What's paradox mean? Have you heard that term before? Okay, it seems counterintuitive or it kind of contradicts itself, okay? The paradox of control essentially is when you give up all control, right? When you give up the control of the things you can't, you actually gain a ton of it. When you just stop trying to control, you gain more of it, right? Do you see how that's a paradox? Why is that, though? How is it that if I give up control, I gain a lot? What do we think?
Because you're giving up control on the things you can't control.
Well, think of energy, right? And opportunity cost. Think about it. Beautiful, right? You're going to have more energy in the things you actually can't control. So you're going to gain a ton of it. You're going to become very powerful as a person because you're not going to get trapped in the things that other people get trapped in, right? Because you're going to continuously get stuck in that state of trying to control things you can't. Make sense? And all the struggle, the suffering, the worry, the anxiety are all of those core concepts around focusing on what we can't control. Yes, which is why we have them, right? We talked about that a little bit. Actually, I don't know if we got to that speech. Do we know what the difference between pain and suffering is? We didn't talk about that? Pain is the initial experience, right? Suffering is when we dwell on the initial experience, right? So trying to control things we can't, say we can't control something like we like a girl, they don't like us back, right? That sucks. That can be painful. If we dwell on that, okay, that's what creates the suffering. That creates the anxiety, all the problems that we have mentally. Does that make sense? And that's the act of trying to control the things you can't. You can't control it, right? So I'm going to put my power into being the best person I can be. Eventually, someone will find me. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's write that down. The paradox of control. Ironically, when I give up all control, I gain a whole lot because I'm not wasting energy anymore on things I can't. Okay? And if you can start to implement the paradox of control, boys, you are fulfilling your potential. And why is that? How are you fulfilling your potential if you implement this? Giving up control. All right, you're doing everything you possibly can to be the best you can be because you're using the energy in an efficient and strategic way. You're not wasting it, right? Because again, we have a limited amount of time as well, okay? And that's a huge, huge concept, and I can talk about it with you older boys. But that's kind of what got me down the sports psychology road, right? My dad passed away. He was the previous owner of the basketball training business, which eventually led to this, okay? But we have limited time, right? And so when we waste stuff, you don't get it back. There isn't an infinite amount of time in your life, right? So that's why it's fulfilling your potential, because you're doing everything you can to be the best you can be. You're not wasting it. Does that make sense? If, say, we had a limited amount of time, then there wouldn't be a worry, because you'd always have more time to change it, but you don't. And it's not to make you scared or anxious. It's just to remind you, you know, you only get one crack at this thing, from what we know. Cool? Does that make sense, the paradox of control? Good concept? Okay. Beautiful. Conditioning, let's write it down. Conditioning. We talked about this in class 1. You good, Noah? Conditioning. Okay? We're going all the way back to class 1. What is this term? Let's think about it. Say we're on autopilot, or say, can you boys drive yet? You can? You boys can? Okay, most of us, half of us can drive. Okay, right? You've gotten to a destination and you have no idea how you've gotten there before. Have you had that experience? You haven't had that before? Okay, eventually, one day, you're going to be driving, and you're going to get to your destination and be like, whoa, how did I get here? I was completely lost in some thought or in some distant land. In that state, are we mindless? Okay? Do we have moments of mindlessness all throughout the day? When we're in that state, we're in a state that's conditioned, right? So up to that point, we have a bunch of habits, of thoughts, of feelings, of reactions, ways of responding to events, okay? That's what conditioning is, right? And that's built up over time by mindlessness, okay? Why is that? When we're mindless, what do we have to act out of? When you're mindless, you have to act out of habits. And is that essentially what conditioning is? Right? When we're conditioned, it's a bunch of the habits within us, whether it's thoughts, feelings, opinions, judgments, reactions to events. That's what conditioning is, right? And when we're mindless, does that feed more into the conditioning? Yes. That's a good guess. It reinforces each other, right? So when we're less mindful, it's only making the conditioning stronger and stronger, all right? When the conditioning is higher, boys, okay, that means we have less what? Less control. Beautiful. Okay? Why is that?
We're allowing ourselves to let go of things that we can't control in order to control the things better that we can control.
Yep, so let's think of a teeter-totter, right?
Mindlessness can be used in like a bad way and a good one for conditioning.
So that's great. We actually have that later in the speech, but we can talk about it now. The ultimate habit is no habit, right? It is great to strive for good habits, right? You have to start somewhere, and that's where I started. I focused on all the good habits that I could build. But if you're focused on habits, right, does that mean it stops evolving if you think you found your good habit?
Yes.
Yeah, it stops evolving, right? I would argue the best habit is to have no habit. It's continuously improving. It doesn't stop evolving. Does that make sense? Where a habit, if you set it in stone and you say, this is good, it'll never improve. It's stagnant. Does that make sense? Okay, so back to this. So think of it as a teeter-totter. When we have more conditioning present, there's less what present? Yeah, there's less you present, right? When I'm mindless, do you have any decisions over anything? No. You're in that conditioned state, right? There's no you in there to change what's going on. Okay, so you have no control of what's going on. Cool? What we're trying to do is have less conditioning, and that's by turning what on more? What's it called? If our mind's mindfulness, right? Watching, seeing what's going on, that's going to allow us to have more power. That's going to allow us to not be in our conditioned, mindless state. Does that make sense, boys? And is it always like full mindfulness and full conditioning? Like when you drive a car and you get there and you have no idea how you got there, yeah, you're in a fully conditioned, mindless state, right? But most of the time it's on a continuum. It goes back and forth from either more mindfulness to less conditioning. Does that make sense? Obviously, we want to start moving the spectrum to, we want to be more aware more of the times, so we're not acting mindlessly and have less control. Are there any questions, boys? Because it can get a little confusing. We're on the same page? Is this kind of interesting? Good, because this speech is kind of tying everything together from the other videos we watched. Have you guys caught up yet on the videos or no? Have you tried watching any of them?
I tried watching the first one.
Okay. Keep trying to watch the videos if you haven't, because there's a lot of things I haven't talked about in these yet that would be very beneficial. Okay. Beautiful. So essentially, it goes back to power, right? When we have more power, we have more what? Control. And when we have more conditioning, we have less what? Yes, less mindfulness, which means less control. Does that make sense? Does everyone have that written down? Let's write that down, if you haven't yet, right? Power has everything to do with control. I'm trying to give you more power. If we're conditioned more, we have less choice and control. Where mindfulness is the opposite end of that spectrum, it gives us more of it. Cool? Do we get the term condition, or do you want me to break that down a little deeper? Break it down? I'll break it down one more time. An example could be, so a very famous study in psychology is that there's this bell and there's this dog, all right? Whenever they get the dog food, all right, when they bring out food, it salivates, right? And when they ring the bell, they do it at the same time they give the dog food. Over time, the dog ties the bell and is conditioned to produce saliva in its mouth because it thinks it's about to get hungry. And then they stopped giving it food, but they kept using the bell, and it would still salivate like it's going to get food, right? So it was conditioned, right, to salivate when it hears the bell. Does that make sense? Do humans work in the same way with different things? Yes, right? Say you have a conflict with somebody, and the second you have a conflict with somebody, you're someone that tends to get angry, right? You feel the emotion of anger instantly. That's been conditioned in you with similar events in your past. Does that make sense? So then your brain and body knows how to, or thinks it does, knows how to respond in that situation, and it acts out of conditioning. Cool? If you're always acting out of conditioning, boys, is it your past self moving through your present self? Yeah, you're not growing, you're not changing. That is the key. The more conditioned I am, the more I'm just bringing my past with me. I'm not really growing, I'm not really changing at all. This is the solution. We talked about it a little bit about it last speech, but write it down. Intention is the solution. Why is intention the solution? To stop conditioning, you got to do what? That's good. So let's think about this. So remember the difference between attention and intention? Yes? Right? Intention is on-purpose attention, correct? Can you have attention in a conditioned state? You sure can. You can have attention on things, right? Do you have to have attention on the road if you're driving mindlessly? There has to be some attention within your brain, but you don't know that you're using attention. There's a difference. Does that make sense? Intention is when you use the attention on purpose, right? When you step in and you're like, oh, I'm going to change something here. I'm not going to continue the pattern that I've had my whole life with whatever this situation is. Does that make sense? Another great example of conditioning is misses or messes up, right? You made a facial expression today when you turned the ball over, and that has been conditioned over your whole basketball career because you respond to that continuously. Does that make sense? That's why a lot of kids, when they miss a shot or they mess up, they do what? They drop their head. Most of them want to stop it, but they literally can't do it because they have been conditioned to do it. So it takes a lot of effort and intention to get in the moment and stop doing it. It's not as simple as just saying, hey, I'm going to stop. Right? I can just cut out completely. It's not that simple. Does that make sense? Because that power of mindlessness and conditioning can be so strong, it's going to take a lot of intentional moments to stop it. And your facial expression wasn't even that bad. That's just what came to mind, James. Does that make sense, though? And again, intention is a type of energy. And we know energy is limited, right? So when we're wasting it on trying to control things I can't, like this girl, she doesn't like me, I got to figure out how to get her to like me, right? That's wasting energy. You can't control it. Cool? So rewrite, intention is on-purpose attention for me to step in to my conditioning and stop what it's doing. Does that make sense, Connor? Are we all on the same page? Can I see you? Check the time, buddy. Okay. Now this is where it gets fun. Intention is the gauge of power. What does that mean?
The more intention you have, the more power.
If you can be a more intentional person, you are more powerful, right? Because when I'm intentional, that means I'm choosing to respond in some way, internally to something. Correct? Right? So the goal is to be continuously intentional, right? If I can be intentional more and more throughout my day, I am gaining power moment by moment.
So like, when you're in a flow state,
Mm-hmm.
are you intentional or are you mindful?
We're going to get to that. We're going to talk about intention, trying, and effortlessness, okay? Because that's a great question, because you can get tripped up by it. There's two different types of energy between intention. Okay, we'll get to that. Are there any other questions? Okay, so write down how intentional you are equals how powerful you are. Right? Intention is our gauge for power, because when we're intentional, that means we're choosing. We have control, we have choice. That's a great question, Hayden. I struggle with that all the time.
How intentional you are is what.
Does that make sense, though, boys? And we can draw a diagram, too. So we can think of like conditioning as this line, right? And is this line going to keep moving? Listen, conditioning is like this line through our life, right? Conditioning is our past self. And if we stay in a mindless state most of the time or react over time, are we going to continue to be that past self? Intention is the one that says stop. It creates space, and something's going to change here, right? I'm going to change some part of my response. Does that make sense? This is where all the power comes from, creating that space that stops the mindless reactions or whatever you're trying to change. And obviously, if you do that over and over again, you can create yourself into whatever you want to create yourself. And that's what's really cool. You can become whoever you want to become if you use power in the right way. Does that make sense? Like me, I failed in 6th grade, I failed a speech test because I didn't want to give one. I didn't do it. Now I do that like all the time. It took a lot of intention for me to learn that anxiety isn't helping me, right? And that I can overcome fear and all sorts of things like that. Does that make sense? Like, again, I'm a completely different person than I was 2 years ago, like completely different, and that's because I became more mindful, more intentional, less conditioned. I could choose to be who I wanted to be. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, back to... Okay, now, this is where it gets really, really subtle and tricky, okay? Intention, trying, and effortlessness. There's two different types of intention, right? You have one intention that tries to control things it can't, right? So an example, let's use just because off the top of my head, the girl's the best one I have, right? Someone that likes a girl and they don't like them back, right? Someone could use that intention to do everything they could to try and change the girl's opinion. And then another person could use the intention to try and just continue to make themselves better as a person, right? Because that they can actually control. Trying to do a bunch of different things to make the girl like them is an example of using intention in the wrong way, right? So the flow state, effortlessness, intention's what gets you into that state, okay? So it's like a bridge to get you into the flow state. But you're not consciously trying to be intentional in that flow state. So that's a great question. But the reason for that is because the intention that's with yourself has surrender paired with it. What did we learn about surrender? It's giving up. What is surrender? It's giving up trying to control things you can't, right? That's what surrender is. Do we remember that from last class? We do? Okay, right? So if I have an intention that has surrender with it, that's effortless, right? If I have an intention that comes with an expectation, right, or a way something's supposed to be after I do this intention, that's what will create strain. That's what will create a non-effortless intention. Does that make sense, boys? Right? So let's think of different examples, because it's very, very important, because we do not want intention to become strain or fighting or hard to do, okay? And the reason for that is because you create an expectation of what's supposed to happen if I do this intention. But if we surrender, there isn't an expectation. It's effortless. It gets you into that flow state. Does that subtlety make sense? Okay, let's break it down quick, right? So let's say we have two different types of intention. One tries to control something it can't, right? So that creates an expectation. Once I intend to do this, this should happen. And that separation, that judgment of what we want, is that what creates tension and problems and issues and struggle and all that stuff? Yes. But if I have an intention, like today, I'm going to try and be more present than I normally am. I'm going to intentionally be more present than I normally am. And let's say that intention has an expectation. I should feel really good today, right? I better feel really good today if I'm more present. I guarantee you're not going to feel good because if you create an expectation with this intention, you haven't surrendered to it. You haven't given up controlling things you can't, right? If we could make ourselves feel good 24/7 all the time, feel our best selves, be our best selves, would we do that? But we can't. So you have to intend and you have to surrender with it. They have to be paired together. Does that make sense, the difference? Because it's huge. You could think of shooting the same way. If I'm going to put more shots up, I intend to do that. Both are intentional acts, but one intention is expecting to make a ton of shots, right? And the other intention surrenders to it. There's no expectation, there's no tension, it's effortless. This person will grow a lot faster. Does that make sense, boys? Are we all on the same page, or do you need me to break it down, the difference between those? We're good? Okay. So let's go back so we can write some stuff. Okay. So trying, you can think of two different things that are different, right? Trying is, say, using an intention to control things you can't. Write that down. Trying equals using an intention to control things you can't. Trying equals using intention to control things you can't. Do most people try? Yeah. All right? And most of them try to control things they can't. Okay? Effortless intention is when we intend on something, but surrender is paired with that intention. Does that make sense? So there's no expectation. You're just going to put your best self forth and trust that it's all going to work out, essentially.
What is that?
Effortless intention, right? Other words for it could be, strained intention versus effortless intention. But trying is kind of the word that came to mind when I thought of that, right? I don't want you guys to try. I want you to be intentional and not worry about it. There's a big difference. Cool? Most people, though, try to gain more intentional control to control things they can't, which is what I'm saying. Do not use it that way. That is a poor use of power. It's still not growing you in any way. because it's just going to lead down the same holes every single time you try and follow that path. Cool? All right, so what do we have for time? Gosh, I want to get through this whole speech, but I don't think I'm going to. Okay. Let's see which ones I have left. I got realize, continuous. Okay. We're going to do 2 more. So realize. Sorry, boys. So all you got to do, Connor, eyes and ears. Let's go. We're almost there. Do you guys like what we're learning so far? Yeah. This stuff is important. Like, this could change who you are, alter butterfly path for the rest of your life. Because most people don't learn about this stuff. They don't understand that a lot of parts of them are just habits and that they don't have a lot of control over them, even though they think they do. Realize. Why is this a huge, huge word? Not a lot of people can do it. Is that all it takes? Can you always be free of whatever you're struggling with? You always have the opportunity. Most people don't do it, right? It just takes being present and letting go of whatever it is you're holding on to, correct? Right? And once we let go of whatever it is we're holding on to, we can use that effortless intention. Does that make sense? So just write a little reminder, right? Realize I can always be free, or I can always be powerful. But what's step 1? This slide, boys, is essentially all we can control, and you should maximize it. What did I say step 1 is? When we realize that you can always be free. Well, yes, right? Let go of whatever it is you're holding on to and be fully here. Because this is the only moment that exists, correct? And if I'm fully here, I can choose to be whatever I want to be when I'm here, fully. Because that means there's no conditioning. Does that make sense? So in that sense, you are free. There's nothing holding you from being whatever you don't want to be. So this is one of my favorite terms. Do you have to wait to be the person you want to be? Most people have this vision of who they're going to be when they grow up, right? And they think they have to wait to get there. Just take on that person now and do that over and over. You're going to get there a lot faster, right? The hard part is holding it. We can always break it down and realize that we're always free, but doing it over and over again and holding it continuously is the hard part. Does that make sense? Everyone you look up to or think is, I could never be like that. I promise you, you can. If you truly want to be like it, take on that now, and when you lose it, come back to it, take it on again. Does that make sense, or is that kind of confusing, the be future you now? We get that? Okay, cool. So going back to the only 3 things we can control, an intentional reset, resetting, being fully here and letting go. Write that down. Intentional resets, number 1. These are the 3 things you can control. And if you put all your energy into it, you're maximizing your power. So an intentional reset, right? We learned about this in class 2. You boys haven't watched the class yet. I encourage you to watch it. Turner Boys class 2 is the one you should watch, if you're going to watch one. That one's really good. It's about time. Right? Resetting, coming back to the moment. We remember that, boys? Letting go of whatever's not this moment because it's not real. It's just a mental thought. Okay? The next step would be an intentional mindful perception, right? So I reset, I'm taking in what's going on mindfully. I'm seeing it clearly, right? A mindful perception means I'm not making any judgments, correct? So I'm non-judging, I'm being mindful of what's going on inside and outside without judgment. Cool? Because if you do that, will you then be able to make the best decision? In the moment, yes. And so then intentional best self response, or if I wanted to change it, we could say future response. Be the future you now. Respond in the way you want to respond intentionally. But the key with that too is that you have to surrender to it. Don't expect something to happen. Just continue to be intentional. Cool? So just remember that, boys. Realize you can gain, in this moment, the most power you could ever gain. You just have to realize it and be fully here. And then you have full choice. Does that make sense? The hard part is holding it, and that's what meditation and mindfulness gives you, right? Training the mind to hold that continuously. See how that's all coming together? Cool. So, potential, growth potential. What do you think, for you as people, has the most growth potential when we talk about bringing down conditioning and giving us more control? The moments that you care about or the moments that you quote-unquote don't care about? That's when you turn your mind off, right? I'm taking the garbage out. This doesn't matter at all. This isn't helping me get good at basketball, right? So you turn your mind off and you let conditioning do the work, or you try and rush through something, or you have homework that you don't want to do, and so you just get it done as fast as possible, right? The small and mundane moments have the most potential for you to grow, because that's when you like to shut your brain off and turn conditioning on. Do you get why that is, though? Right? Obviously, you're going to have your brain on if you really care about it and you want to get better at it, right? But the moments where you separate and you think it's not important, okay, that's when you have to turn mindfulness on the most. Does that make sense, boys? Cool. So let's write that down, all right? The most potential for my growth are the moments that I think don't matter. And so I turn my brain off and conditioning is turned on. I turn my mindfulness off. Not your brain. Your brain's always running. So the key is, boys, should we separate things into important and not important? No. Life is the practice. Write it down. That is probably the 4 biggest words I remind myself on a daily basis. Life is the practice. Yeah, and moments that you consider small or not important. What do you think life is the practice means? Are we always training ourselves? Yes. You think taking the garbage out or doing the dishes doesn't matter for your basketball game. I promise you it does, because how you train yourself to approach doing the dishes is how you train yourself to approach dribbling the basketball or training yourself to be better. Correct? They have a direct correlation because the mind relates to everything. You can't experience anything without the mind. Does that make sense? So stop the separation. The whole thing is a practice for you to reset, be present, respond in your best self. Does that make sense? Because you're always training yourself. Write that down. That's a good one too. I am always training myself, whether I pay attention to it or not. Cool? Shoot. All right, we got 4 minutes. So, boys, what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you how to do mindful walking, okay? Why do you think I'm going to level you up to learn how to mindfully walk? Most of the time, is walking not important? Well, walking is important, but do you pay attention to it at all? You can walk without thinking at all, right? You can be completely conditioned and just walk, right, out of habit. Okay? Learning how to walk mindfully can hopefully translate to a lot of those small, mundane moments that we don't pay attention to. What did you say? No. Okay? So, I got to explain this in 3 minutes, so I'll do it to the best of my ability. There's options here. You have to do it for the length of time. So you guys are leveling up to 10 minutes, correct? Other than you guys, you're at 7. Okay, so you have a mindful walk for that amount of time. All you do is you set your timer down and you find a path to walk. Okay, so say my path to walk is up to the table. All right? When I'm mindfully walking, you are going a lot slower than normal. Why? If I'm going slower than normal, do I have conditioning turned on? No. We are not acting out of habit if I'm moving very, very slowly and paying attention to things I don't normally notice. Does that make sense? So that's step 1. It's getting you out of that habit mode, mindless mode. Okay? What I'm going to have you guys do is 3 breaths, or 3 steps for inhale. Write that down. 3 steps for inhale, 4 steps for exhale. The reason we have an exhale a little longer than the inhale is because that gets you in a state of relaxation, a state of calm. So it allows you to see more clearly.
How many steps for exhale?
4. Okay? So all you're going to be doing, boys, there isn't a right way, eyes and ears. There isn't a right way to mindfully walk as long as you have the watcher turned on. I'm going to pair your breathing with your steps so it's easier for you to not get lost. But it's just like the meditation. If you get lost, is that okay? Just come back to the moment. Be fully here. See what's going on clearly. Does that make sense? So, if I start here, I found my path. Okay, it's not like I'm just, you could walk to a certain destination. You could totally do that. But for this practice, you'd want to stay by your timer so you don't have to look at the time. You set a timer and you forget it. Does that make sense? Do you have a question? Okay. So, once I step, boys, all you're doing is you're pairing your breath with your steps. At first, it's going to be hard to pair your breath with your steps, okay? But once you get used to it, then start paying attention to things you don't normally notice. How does it feel for my foot to hit the pavement? How does my body keep its balance when it has one foot on the ground, right? Just little things like that. What are my arms doing when I'm walking, okay? You're completely turning conditioning off. That is the point of mindful doing. Does that make sense? But you have an option, or you could substitute it with a chore, okay? So the dishes, for example, okay? When I take out the dishes, I'm doing it as clearly and as presently as possible. I'm not trying to mindlessly put the dish into this cabinet, whatever it may be, okay? Because the whole point of this speech is to turn off conditioning, give you more power, and that's in the small and mundane moments. That's the most potential for growth. So chores is another one, or anything else you think that you turn off your brain, you could do it. Does that make sense, boys? Sadly, I don't have enough time to practice it with you today because I got another class, but is that a good enough instruction of what to do? You think you get the gist of what we're trying to do? Any questions about today?
I'm so surprised that you can drive to a location that long and got there.
Just wait until that happens.